Here we go. Hey, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Positive Growth Lounge. My name is Phil Januszewski. I'm honored to be the moderator today. We have a guest speaker today, but just a little quick background. We're a group of educators that love coming together twice a month to better our lives, better ourselves, and come better at everything. Not only our personal lives, but the classroom too. So as we do these, we love bringing in different ideas and guests and inviting people in just to grow. But if this is a vibe for you and an energy, I encourage you to reach out afterwards. We'd love to have you as a guest for a couple weeks or months to see if this is a family for you. But without further ado, though, I'm super excited, friends. We have our guest speaker today. His name is Mr. Hunter Hickman, and I had the pleasure of meeting him through the wonderful Shannon Anderson, who was actually a guest speaker on our Positive Growth Lounge meetup a while back. So, a fellow Indiana Hoosier that is helping pouring into us today. By the way, is Hoosier a term of endearment? It's not a mean term, is it, Hunter?
No, I don't think it's a degrading term whatsoever. I think Purdue fans accept the term Hoosier when referring to their statehood, but no, it's all good.
Yeah, good point. The Boilermakers might not like being called that. That's a very fair point. All right, but friends, Hunter is here today with us, and he is a teacher. He's in the weeds doing it, but he's also called to help education. He's an instructional leader, and he looks to improve the classroom, and that's through like giving better feedback, having better student outcomes, improving teaching. He's doing it all, and he's been going to different conferences and all over the country, trying to pour in and help people figure out like what exactly should we do with AI and how can we use it to better everything. And that's why I actually talked to Hunter and I asked him if he would come on and pour into us. So, Hunter, so grateful you're here, my man. If you want to kick things off, maybe tell us anything that I forgot to mention about you, and then we'd love to hear what you have in store for us today.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. Kind of funny that he mentioned Shannon, and if you guys did get a chance to meet Shannon, Shannon was actually my first grade teacher. My mom actually babysat her daughters when they were growing up, and so we know them very well, and Shannon's awesome. So really cool that she's been on here. I guess I didn't know that she spoke on here at one point, but she did reach out, told me congrats on being able to speak tonight. But now I'm excited to talk to you guys a little bit about AI. I hope that through this, um, you understand kind of my approach to this is, I would say, rather balanced. I am not a cheerleader or advocate for AI, but I guess the way I look at it is it's not going anywhere. It's here. Whether we have policies that allow for AI to be used in the classrooms or ban AI, kids are going to use it no matter what. And so I think we have to try and find ways to make this as positive as possible for our students. And if we do that and we explore kind of how these tools work, I think we can find um, some things in education that maybe have been gaps for a very long time. Kind of the cliche quote right now is, uh, AI is not hurting education, it's exposing it, right? And that's kind of a cheesy LinkedIn cliche thing. But I do think what it does is it allows us to really take a step back and ask ourselves, why are we doing certain things in the classroom? Uh, where does learning take place in our individual curriculums, and how do we get our kids to experience that as much as possible? And so I'm going to go through I think, some misconceptions on a lot of things that I see and hear regarding AI, kind of based on my experience, but also just based on talking to others who are kind of doing the same thing I'm doing, where they're in the classroom and kind of playing with these things and these ideas. Because I'll be honest with you, a lot of people that I think you see on LinkedIn or you hear talk about this are kind of snake oil salesmen, where you get a lot of people who are trying to grab pieces of the market right now and sell products, or you have people who are incredibly bullish on AI that aren't really, I think, uh, giving the entire picture on what some of the pros and cons are. And so hopefully we can kind of unwrap some of those things tonight. And if you guys do have questions throughout, feel free to interrupt me. You're not going to upset me by doing that at all. I want to make sure I help you guys as best as possible. So, um, first thing, just I would say three big misconceptions that I hear a lot. Number one, AI makes students smarter or perform better. And I'll get into that more here in a little bit. Uh, I would say AI makes students faster, but it doesn't equate to smarter. And that's kind of the title of this is speed versus intelligence.
Hmm.
And so in a little bit, I'll kind of unpack that one a little bit more in depth. One that I hear a lot, and I used to say this one, and I think the more I learn about AI and kind of what's happening under the hood is AI is a tool. It's like a calculator, right? And I think that's a very um, convenient way to explain AI to someone who is not familiar with anything on the technical side. And so calculators compute, AI generates. That's the biggest difference, right? And so AI can confidently lie to you, right? We know a lot of us are familiar with hallucinations. And so the reason it's so powerful but so dangerous is that it does generate new information. It's its own intellectual property. But with that being said, if you don't know the type of context you have to have, the type of parameters you have to set with the AI, it'll just make things up. And then it sounds believable. It sounds awesome. But when you start to really break it down, the more you're exposed to it, you realize it has a lot of limitations if not used properly. And so I would be very careful comparing that to a calculator. And so when someone does bring that up and tries to almost oversimplify that, I would kind of call them out for it and then just kind of be like, well, wait a second, they're very different ideas. Let's start to deconstruct this a little bit. And then last one, if a student uses AI, they are not learning. That's the other side of the argument is there's a lot of people right now. There's a big LinkedIn uh, LinkedIn's very toxic, by the way. If anybody's on LinkedIn, if I don't know if anyone gets on LinkedIn every day, but the LinkedIn AI world is incredibly toxic. But one of the arguments right now is that students learn better by taking paper notes, and then there's this attack on technology as a whole. And what fails to get brought up in that conversation is, well, that study was done about 10 years ago. It was done in a college classroom. And the thing that people don't unpack with that is the reason why it was found that paper notes were better is because students who were using technology were trying to write every single word the professor was saying instead of continuing to paraphrase within that study. And so there's a lot of like catchphrases out there. There's a lot of I think false dilemmas being created within this argument, and a lot of it is being put on AI use when a lot of these problems actually stemmed long before AI was introduced into the classroom. And so I'm going to break that down a little bit further here in a little bit as well. So first thing that I would really invite you to think about, and this whole presentation I have is pretty much product agnostic. Like I'm not really getting into like the tools I use. I'll let you know at the very end some of the things that I do use, but I'm not going to show you like, you know, these are the three things that you can do with Notebook LM, and that's why they're the best. Because I think everyone's AI use is going to look very different in their classroom based on whatever their learning objectives are, what their student populations, strengths and weaknesses are. And that's kind of the beauty of AI is it can be a very good differentiating tool for a teacher to make it whatever they want. But conceptually, I think the thing that we struggle with the most is this idea of speed versus intelligence. And I think sometimes those two terms get conflated. So speed is this just Google it culture that we've created over the last 15, 20 years. And I think slowly over time, we've seen education go that direction where we've begun to offload certain tasks because it's just easier to do it that way. It's quicker, and we feel like we can get more content done. But what that's incentivize our students to do is to either cognitively offload or suspend cognitive functions to some sort of delegating bot, right? And so when we think of like vocabulary assignments in an ELA classroom, instead of kids going through the dictionary and then using that word in a paper, we've said just go Google the definition real quick. And so it's quick, but they're not going through that process of learning friction and learning how to use that word in a sentence or in a paragraph or whatever you may say. Now, there's a difference between what a lot of people call cognitive offloading and what's called cognitive suspension. So, cognitive suspension would be there is no thinking at all. Like this is something that's happening under the hood. So when you think of like agentic AI, and if you've heard of like OpenClaw, where you can create an agent that essentially works for you 24/7, is answering emails for you, is sending out marketing, online marketing to different places, that would be cognitive suspension. And we don't have a lot of that in schools, just because there's got to be a decision made somewhere. But cognitive offloading would be the decision to say this task can be done quicker or better by something else. And so when we think of citation generators in the ELA classroom, or we think of, sometimes like YouTube videos, or uh, can be a sort of a way of cognitively offloading, where we just try to find the answer, but we don't actually go through that process of frictional thought. And that's kind of the challenge right now in the classroom, is getting kids to slow down and not try and get things done as fast as possible so that they can experience that resistance necessary to train their brain to learn. And that's the thing that I think people are sometimes getting confused right now, is that it's not technology that's the issue, it's the processes and systems we have established in our classrooms over the last 15 to 20 years. And so that's why I say this problem originates long before large language models. This is not an AI problem. This is a structural school problem. And part of that might be just because we've had so much thrown on our plates, and we have so many standards we have to, follow and get done with in our classes. We've got testing, we've got all these different things, but it has become a problem of the more we can get done in the same amount of time, the better. Whereas intelligence, right, requires that understanding and frictional thought, where students got to receive or have to feel some sort of resistance. And so I think of it like going to the weight room, right? If I go to the weight room and I lift weights, my muscles are going to break down, but they're going to recover, and I'm going to be stronger at the end. But I had to have that resistance training to get to that point. Uh, when we cognitively offload, we're not always getting that, right? So we're going in there and we're lifting 5-pound dumbbells and calling it a day, right? There was a decision made to go work out, but it wasn't the resistance we needed to become stronger at the very end of that. And so that's, I think, the biggest challenge in the classroom right now. So I
Hunter,
think to,
do you find that students are starting to question if intelligence is worthwhile? Like, I know that I won't remember this, but Mr. Hickman, when I do need this, I can just go back and get that information again. Do you think there's any attitude like that that's starting to develop in the maybe older students in education?
um, yes and no. The funny thing about that is when we've talked about AI in the classroom, and like we've had some debates and stuff in there, and the kids recognize it's not good for them, like to just pass things off to a bot, because they know they won't think. So they recognize that, but there's still like that temptation to do it.
Mm.
And I think that's a deeper problem, right? I think that's a problem of, we really value in education the end product, but we don't value the process as much. And so when we grade things, the weight of that grade goes into end products. Well, that's the easiest thing for an AI to generate. And so if a student can get it done faster with less resistance and get the same grade, why would they not do that? So like one of the things I've done in my classroom is like for papers, and when I've talked to some ELA teachers, this isn't always a popular thing. But I think it's the direction we have to go, is I reward the process on their papers. So if a kid, um, the tool I use, I can kind of track all of their progress and all their edits and whatnot. The kid comes in, turns it on time, tries to incorporate the coaching points we've talked about in class into their papers, basically do the whole process right. They get an A on their paper. Now, if they start slipping up and doing some of those things wrong, that's where they get deducted points. Um, and I have 104 students across two writing assessments first semester. I had one kid who cheated. That was it. Whereas prior to implementing this policy, I would have probably had 10 to 15 kids cheat on just one paper.
Mm.
So there's definitely some proof in that process of trying to get kids to go through the struggle of it versus just fighting that temptation of I have to get an A. And so I'll do whatever's necessary to get an A, even if that requires using AI to help me do that. Because otherwise, if we go process based, there's no incentive to use AI outside of the ways which I'll explain. Maybe we can use it a little later here. But so some questions I think to ask when you're kind of trying to decide, how do I use AI? When do I use AI? Which I think is a skill in itself, is number one is like, what is at stake? What are the consequences of using AI? So, an example that I think is good is like if I'm sitting on the couch and I'm watching a basketball game and I need to know a stat, why not ChatGPT that? There's nothing at stake there. If I get that wrong or it's a mistake, then who cares, right? But it is a quick way to kind of like have some good conversation with, my wife or my dad or whoever I'm watching the game with. But then when it comes to, writing an entire paper at the graduate level, I'm absolutely not going to use it because what do I have to lose? Well, a lot of money and a lot of time. There's a lot more at stake there. And so that's where I think we have to start weighing our options of, you know, when do we use it? Why do we use it? One of the biggest problems I see is like as an ELA teacher is teachers really wanting to find AI tools to grade papers for them. And I'm not a fan of that at all. Um, I think it can be a really good like aid. Like one way that I've used it before is I've graded two or three papers and I felt like I was being really harsh. I'm like, ooh, I don't know. So I actually, you know, I didn't put any student data in there, obviously, but I just copied and pasted like some of the writing, put it in ChatGPT real quick, and said, hey, grade this based on my rubric. And it scored it very similar. Another tool you can use for that would be Magic School. Magic School it protects student data as well. So you can put a paper in there, have it graded for you on the score, and then kind of compare the two scores and make sure that, it's just a collaborator, right? It can kind of tell you what it's seen and you can compare what you're seeing to that. And just, it has a way to be kind of like a teacher's aid for you in a way. But it's more to calibrate myself than it is to do the work for me. Because I feel like that's a slippery slope as well. If we start modeling that type of AI use as a teacher, what do we expect our kids to do? And do they start to lose trust in us as well? And so I think that's a really important concept to kind of wrestle with as a teacher. The second question is, when does student learning take place and how does it make it better? Like, don't ask how AI can speed things up for you, but rather, how can it make what's important in my classroom better? Because there's way too many companies and way too many teachers right now saying, I saved 6 hours this week. Okay, that's great. What did you do with those 6 hours, though? Because a lazy teacher doesn't do anything with those 6 hours. A good teacher finds a way to make their product better. And if I had to guess, the majority of teachers are not taking those 6 hours and just not doing anything with them. They're not replacing those 6 hours with something constructive. And I see some good in that when it comes to grading papers sometimes, but at the same time, like, um, what are you doing to improve your classroom and improve your student performance then? If it's just to save you time and your student performance isn't getting any better, then it's not worth it, in my opinion.
Mm.
There's things that you can use AI for to improve your instruction, improve your classroom. And then lastly, who is ultimately responsible for the information that's generated? Who is generating it, and what are the implications? So that's one that I've tried to use with my kids a lot. Is I kids have used citation generators in the past. Well, I made a notebook LM for them with all of the Purdue Online Writing Lab sources in it. So they have to ask the LM, how do I cite a source in MLA format? And it gives them instruction with footnotes. So they still have to think about it. They still have to apply it to their own sources, but um, it doesn't do it for them like a generator. So the responsibility is still on them, but it speeds up the process. So they can build an understanding better while still speeding up their process with an AI tool. But I'll still have kids ask like, well, can I use a generator? And it's like, no, that defeats the purpose of like that whole frictional thought, right? And once you explain that to them to kind of your question, Phil, I think they usually do a pretty good job of understanding like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like that sucks, but it makes sense.
Yeah.
So I think you have to have a very balanced and um, pragmatic pragmatic approach to it. And if you do that and they see value in that, then they buy into it. Um, But if they see you saving time and not putting more forth more effort in them, then I think they have good BS meters. So I think they can feel that as well. So um, one thing I did with my class too, and hopefully we can share this slideshow with everybody, but this really helped my students, I think, as well, is I did an activity with them in class one day to kind of explain this whole concept to them before we started a research project. And so I had the students split up into groups of two or three, and I told them they're going to talk for a minute each with just round one with the categories listed below. So they had to choose one of those topics, and they had talked about as much as they could for a minute. So they had the rules of baseball, American history, and types of fast food. So they talked about it for a minute. They each went around, and then we took a break. And I said, okay, this round you got to choose from one of these next three topics. So they have the rules of cricket, how a touchscreen works, and food from Spain, things that they're not going to be familiar with whatsoever. So they did the same thing, round two. And at the very end of that, I asked, which round was more difficult? Why was it more difficult? Yada, yada, yada. And so, of course, it was always round two. It's because, well, we're just not as familiar with that. It's not ingrained in our culture. I'm like, great. I was like, what I want you to do is right now, I want you to take 2 minutes and I want you to Google as much as you can about the topic you chose. So it could be the rule of cricket. And so we did that. And then after they were done with the 2 minutes, we took a break and we went into like our lesson about finding credible sources. At the very end of that like 20-minute lesson, I said, hey, when we went through round two, we did that Google search. How many of you remember what you learned in that Google search? And about half the kids remembered something. And then I asked them a question and said, okay, so tell me something about cricket. And like a kid would say something like, well, there's 11 players in cricket. I'm like, great. What's one name of one of the positions? I'm like, well, I don't know about that. Like, okay. And that proves my point, right? Is like we can know facts by Googling them quickly. We can find things quickly and recite information back, but it doesn't mean we understand it. And if we don't understand it and we can't stand behind our work, if I ask you a follow-up question about your paper and you don't know, you didn't learn anything, right? Either someone else did it for you or you didn't try to develop. And so that I think has really helped them understand like, oh, I've got to do some work here. I've got to understand this project because if I don't, I'm not going to get a good grade because I didn't go through that process. And so I think it's a really good thing to use with not only your students, but your teachers to get them to understand the difference between these two. And then your teachers can reverse engineer and think about, okay, how do I get my kids to learn in the classroom and not just pass a test, right? And that's honestly I think a really big problem we face in education right now. Um, a metaphor I kind of have for this, I wanted to throw this in here because I think that AI gets a bad rap sometimes as far as its capability, but I kind of compare it to tofu, right? And so I had a college professor that had a metaphor similar to this. It wasn't about AI, obviously, but um, it's got no flavor of its own. It takes on the flavor of whatever you cook it with. And so, um, if you just have AI there on its own, you guys have probably seen on Facebook or LinkedIn or whatever, just AI slop everywhere. And I mean, your AI radar goes off right away when you see a stinking flyer on Facebook. They drive me crazy. Um, so on its own, it's honestly it's slop. It's a great name for it. But when used properly, when given the right context, when understanding how to create these systems that work for you and with you as a collaborator, it's not threatening, it's not magic, and it gives the user agency. And I think that's really key. Is I think sometimes students and teachers alike both think if I ask the question, it's got to be right, and like they almost become enslaved to it in a way. Um, and I tell the kids all the time, like the AI works for you, you don't work for the AI. So if you can evaluate that and understand, like, hey, I need to think critically about everything I see here and do my research and try to, I think, build those skills. I think then you become the agent, and you actually can have more critical thinking now because you're constantly evaluating everything maybe than prior. You have more opportunity to do it now than you did prior to AI being introduced in the classroom. And so that's why I think, it's a great comparison to say it's tofu, right? Because we can make, I had a professor who he brought us over to his house and he made vegetarian tacos because he was vegetarian. And you could either have all veggies on it or you could have tofu with it, but the tofu had like taco seasoning on it. So it became kind of what you wanted. He was the chef and he had the agency to create whatever he wanted with that tofu. And so I view AI kind of in a similar way, that it can become a very powerful tool if we understand how to use it, if we understand what its limitations are, and we provide purpose to it first rather than use it as a glorified Google search to save us time. And so there's a John Haiti quote from a couple years ago: "The technology is not inherently high or low impact, but rather technology that replicates low impact practices stays low impact." And so when we think of like cognitive offloading and low impact vocabulary assignments, yeah, technology is not going to make that a better experience for our students. It's not going to all of a sudden become high impact because we introduce technology. When we introduce an AI tutor in the classroom, if we don't have purpose behind that, it's not going to be impactful. So what it was prior to introducing in the classroom is what's going to remain. It's not going to improve that practice. But if we have that purpose and we see the value and we can introduce technology and use it to extend our reach or amplify what we're already doing well, it can extend those high impact practices. So when we think of like things like feedback, deliberate practice where students are forced to think and struggle or interrogate or evaluate different concepts, we can amplify those results. And that's the truth with AI as well. And I've seen it, I think, more so on the writing side than anything else. But I've seen it a lot here recently with kids like doing independent research for projects is they'll go in and they'll evaluate and start looking at, okay, why is this credible? Like, was this written by a professor from Stanford, or was this written by Joe Schmo who has a blog, right? And just teaching that simple discernment is a big step, I think, for 14 and 15-year-old kids because they see it on TikTok and it's real, right? It's the truth. They don't have that ability to discern like maybe a veteran teacher does at this point. So they have to be taught those skills, maybe even more so than any other time in history because of all the opportunities they have to be exposed to information. So um, I think like I said, I think it can amplify a lot of the good things we already do in the classroom versus be a replacement for low impact skills and lessons. Show a couple more things here. So I had a colleague who kind of introduced to me what was called the AI sandwich framework, which was when we use AI, we have to start that cycle by having an idea or a purpose. And then the AI is going to collaborate with us based on that context idea. It's going to do its thing, speed up our process, maybe help give us some ideas. But then it's our responsibility at the very end to evaluate that and determine, are we going to accept it? Are we going to reject it? Or are we going to iterate it? And if we iterate, that cycle just continues. So then our purpose changes slightly when we iterate, and then that cycle continues. Well, I didn't like sandwich because sandwiches aren't round and cyclical. So I thought about this a little bit. I like the bagel just because it's round. But then every time we iterate, we add depth to that bagel, right? So we start adding the meat and the cheese and or maybe have cream cheese and whatever, right? But we every time we iterate, it gets better and better and better until we finally reach our final result. That sandwich is just kind of static, right? It's not cyclical. It's not going around and around and around. But with that bagel, every time that we go around, we just add another layer within that. And if we can learn that cycle and make sure that we are always at the beginning and the end of that cycle, AI can become, like I said, a very powerful tool that can really help your students and yourself learn and become better. And so just it's something that I think you can review in your own time. I know we're kind of running short on time here, but if we can share this out later, look at this. And I think this is a great way to kind of explain how we're supposed to use it versus it just being I ask a question, it gives me an answer, and I automatically accept that answer.
There's a comment here. Hunter, Chris said that he tells his students that if you want to use AI, should do about 12 iterations. Humans can complete the task end to end. AI can be, the help in the middle. So it sounds like that
Yeah,
overlaps what you're saying.
yeah. I would say that most of the things I do, it's unless I'm like asking like, what restaurants are in Louisville, Kentucky. Most of my stuff is back and forth. I would say that 10 to 12 mark is probably a pretty good number. So I like that. So a couple just last minute tips here. Just some things I think that if you're wanting to really understand AI and large language models as a whole, I would familiar yourself with these terms. Prompt engineering. I think every teacher has to understand how to prompt effectively, and it's same with students. If you don't, then you're not going to get the outputs you need to create something productive. Hallucinations, I mean, we all use the term and understand the term hallucinations, but I don't think everyone understands exactly what it is. So that the technical term for that is next token prediction. That's something that I would think in your own time, understand what that is, understand what a context window is, and how those things factor into the outputs that we get. The four Ds, which were created by Anthropic, which is like what Claude belongs to, description, delegation, discernment, diligence. That comes from a course that they created called AI Literacy for Teachers, and there's an AI Literacy for Students. Or I'm sorry, it's AI maybe Foundations or Fundamentals. Um, if you go on Anthropic's site, you'll see the two or three education-based courses. Those are the best courses I've taken because they're fundamental, they're foundational. They don't teach you how to use a tool. They're very product agnostic, and so they allow you to kind of build your literacy, your expertise in language models. Um, Cognitive offloading and suspension, kind of talked about a little bit earlier. And then one that I don't know why no one talks about this. It blows my mind is this idea called RAG, which is called retrieval augmentation generation. What that is kind of like how Notebook LM works. If you're familiar with Notebook LM, you create this database of sources, and the AI only uses that database
Mhm.
to give you outputs. That's what RAG is. Uh, there's never going to be a hallucination with a RAG system unless there's a bad source in that data set. So that wouldn't even be a hallucination. It would be bad data that you have in there. And that completely overcomes the problem with hallucinations, which hallucinations happen because they have such large training data sets that that next token prediction just guesses wrong sometimes. But if you have a small training set, you completely overcome that. And teachers get really upset about hallucinations and all these, but you can design systems that don't have hallucinations if you understand what RAG is. But I have not seen a teacher or an educator ever mention RAG to other teachers, and I have no idea why. It's actually a rather simple concept. Um, and then just some questions to wrestle with, and I'll let you guys kind of read those on your own. But they kind of repeat some of the questions I talked about a little bit earlier. Some tools that I use. I have become an avid Claude user. I was always a ChatGPT guy, but Claude is, in my opinion, by far the best tool that you can use. I use it for a lot of things, whether it's uh, you know creation, whether it's we did an AI survey at our school, and so I used the data to create a report, has some graphics on it, whatnot. I use it for a lot of side projects as far as like coding and some different things that I'm working on kind of in my own time. But Claude to me is the best. I do use ChatGPT for a few things still. With my kids, I use a lot of Notebook LM just because I can create those RAG systems and create really good sources for them to get things done quickly, but still um, have them struggle to try and find uh, information and kind of wrestle with it. And then we are a Conmigo school. I use Conmigo Writing Coach just as a way to um, sort of hold kids accountable. It's got some good features on there where I can see their writing in real time and coach them up in the process rather than waiting for them to submit drafts before I give them feedback, which I think is really important. There's some research that suggests that best time to give feedback is within those first few hours of them completing the task. And so we can kind of accomplish that in the classroom when we use that tool. So um, I'm sorry if I took a little too long there. I get a little windy sometimes. My wife gets mad at me for it, but
No, Hunter,
um, I'm happy. I'm happy to stay on too if people have questions, and I'm not in a hurry to get anywhere. So
thank you, Hunter. First of all, thanks for going through all of that. But I have a couple questions. One thing Steve brought up there that he mentioned Google Gemini is introducing a RAG feature that you can just pull from your selected Google Docs as well, which sounds like that could streamline things that you've made for your class that are only pulling from that. That's a
yeah,
pretty,
but
I'm glad you brought that up. I've never heard
they
of
all
RAG, but that makes
yeah
sense.
they also just integrated Notebook LM into Gemini, so you can access your Notebook LMs straight through Gemini, which is a huge deal because you can now integrate like that LLM piece with um, Gemini and interact with it a little bit differently than you could in Notebook LM. So there's a lot of cool features with that as well. So, but yeah,
In
those
your
questions.
classroom, are you specifically using RAGs then when you're encouraging kids to use AI so that it's more guided and, for lack of a better term, protected, I guess?
As best as possible, yeah. So I use, for example, I created a Notebook LM for them where they can't add sources to it just for citations and formatting. Because otherwise, what they would do is go to Purdue Owl, and Purdue Owl, if you've ever been on there, is like there's a million pages on there. And so I just took the pages and put them in a source. And then if they just know what they're looking for, it streamlines just the scrolling, right? Which is not, that's thoughtless. But they still, it gives them the exact citation from the sites. And so they'll see the exact example from that page, and then they can use that to help themselves better understand citations and whatnot. And then, like for their research project, I have them create their own, and then they can create different artifacts with it. So they can create a podcast with it and ask the podcast a question, and the podcast will discuss their question. They can create a mind map where it's like a flow chart and it helps them with some brainstorming and some idea generation. They can add notes to it. So if they find a quote they really like, they can add that to a note and put it as a source, and it'll remember that to give it some more precise outputs. Um, so there's a lot of cool features you can use with that, and still I feel like be in control of what they're generating, or at least in more control. Because the truth is, we really have an illusion of control. Like if a kid goes home and uses AI, like I mean, there's nothing we can do about it.
Right.
But if we can create better systems where they're more incentivized to learn, so we speed up processes while also forcing them to experience that frictional thought, then I think we're kind of getting the best of both worlds. But that takes, I think, some creativity and some thought and some experimentation with these tools to really understand um, how they work.
I found executive functioning stuff has helped my former students. Like if we had a 5 day project, I had a template, a rubric of what they were doing, and they had this time in class. And I found a lot of my 16-year-old students struggled gauging like how much should I be doing every day to be ahead. I encourage them to like, we'll take the template, let's put it in something like chat, say how many days you're working on it, what you're doing, and just create like a rough outline to get a starting point. And then I told them, let's look at it and see, is this realistic with the time you have? And do you think this is achievable, or is it too slow or too fast? What I'm hoping it does is teach them like that, okay, maybe it can be a tool that could help them overcome that, that friction of I don't even know where to begin. Like, how much do I need to get done today and not cram? I felt that. And then one of the biggest time savers for me as a teacher was these tough emails that I had to document rough moments in the classroom. And I could just vomit up all the information, and then AI could really sum it nice so that it was non-biased. I was supportive still, where sometimes when I would write these emails, they would take like 25 minutes because I would read it over and over and make sure I didn't. And I felt like that saved me. So that 25 minutes it saved me, now I could be working on making my class better so that my students could learn as opposed to worried about this, email that was tough to write. so the time saving that way, like secretarial style, opened up time in my classroom for, the heavier thinking, the important stuff.
Yeah, I would say the synthesizing stuff helps a lot. Like I tend to have a lot of ideas and they sometimes become scattered. And so it's nice to create a system where I can connect those ideas. So for anyone that's interested in this, like I use a filing system called Obsidian, where it basically like takes anything that I enter into Claude and I file it in there, and then what it will do is it'll create wiki links and tags and whatnot, and connect those different ideas. And so then when I want to work in that entire filing system, I connect it to Claude. I can ask a question, and it gives me outputs sort of based on the things I've already entered in there. And so you're kind of in a way creating like a second brain, um, which sounds very like Terminator, but it's not meant to be. Like it's a really good way to keep you more organized,
Mhm.
connect those ideas. And so, like for example, like this presentation, I'll go and I'll write a report, like an entry, based on like this is the presentation I had. This was the kind of questions I got asked, and then it'll store all that. And so in 5 years, it'll be nice to have that like connecting data to sort of reflect back on and connect to maybe something I'm working on in 5 years. So I think there's some really cool features that aren't being talked about like that in the educator space. That if they were, I think teachers could find those very resourceful too. Like taking all your curriculums, synthesizing them in a LLM, and then figuring out where those gaps are. What are your strengths? What are the weaknesses? What are some things to think about? And then you still have to evaluate all the information, but it can prompt some conversations, some ideas that maybe you hadn't thought about before. So that's something that we've done in our department a little bit. Still trying to get some of my department on board with kind of experimenting a little bit more, but um, I think those are some ways in which you can use it at a larger scale too to, like I said, organize your thoughts, organize your processes, make your systems a little bit better, and in effect, make the entire learning experience better.
Yeah, well said. Well said. It is. It's so much to think about. Just getting started is just a great way. Try something, see how it works. And I think people are intimidated by it, making it feel like this huge thing. But there are ways to dip your toe in, even if it is, like you said, just organizational and a little time saving. Maybe not directly impacting the class, but impacting your time so that you can
Yeah.
pour into the class more. I think that's a beautiful thing. I know, Hunter, where I know people are with the time in that. I'm sticking around. I appreciate your time too. What's a way that we can support you, get in touch with you? I see on your slide you're on LinkedIn.
Yeah. Anybody wants to at some point connect, my school email is at the top there. I also just recently started a little PD consulting speaking company. So if there's ways to collaborate that your staff department might be interested in, let me know. I have a site there down below too. It's called Hickman Consulting. Um, I'd be happy to help in any way I can and give feedback, whether it be at the, like I said, the individual, team, building, department level, doesn't matter. That bottom right hand corner as well is just a little Google site. It's just got it's like my professional portfolio. I put it on every one of my slideshows. So feel free to go and look in there. And if there's something that catches your attention that you really like, feel free to reach out, and I'm always happy to collaborate. So I meet with people all the time. So I love these conversations, and I love um, you know learning new things about it, learning what other people are doing. So if there's a way that you think we could bring value to each other, please reach out and let me know.
Yeah, Hunter, thank you so much for this. I'm sticking around too. I'm going to unshare the screen, but can we get a copy of this presentation? I'm going to send a recap email
Yeah.
out and I'll send everybody so that you can keep in touch, including your website in that. That way it'll be easy and people can reach right out to you with very little friction if that's cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll email to you here in a little bit, and then you can do your thing with it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Friends, if you got to go, we completely understand. Hunter, thank you so much for your time. It's crazy how fast the time goes in the virtual world, but I think this is a topic that we could spend hours and hours on. But, friends, if anyone has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself, Hunter, if you want to unshare your screen, that way maybe we could all pop up and get a little bit bigger. And then I'm going to unspotlight us as well. That way we'll be a little bit more cash. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to jump on in. I'm also going to hit the stop record button. That way, in case anyone has a personal question about AI, they don't have to feel like they have to hesitate on that.